my name is Jack. I'm 13 and in 8th grade.
My name is Kate. I'm 13 and I'm in the 8th grade.
Well, I'm in National Honor Society.
So am I. I'm a starter on the volleyball varsity team.
Well, I'm a starter on the varsity basketball team. And I'm in the drama club.
To be or not to be?
Is that a question?
I'm a victim of sexual abuse.
So am I.
We're going to keep moving along here. And again, want to invite you to participate in the conversation on social media using the hashtag #EndItNowNAD. And I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Ruben Muriente. Ruben is the outreach coordinator for the Family Justice Center in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he promotes awareness on issues related to gender-based violence, prevention of domestic and intimate partner violence, and any behavior that leads to unhealthy relationships. Ruben works with at-risk youth, abused children, juveniles, and victims of abuse. His passion is centered on speaking for those marginalized and silenced by abuse or neglects of others. Ruben, welcome. Help me welcome him.
Thank you very much. I want to say thank you for all of you being here, even though a lot of you were told you had to be here. It's good for us to get a reality check when it comes to the spiritual health of our church. I have often said that abuse is the #1 threat to the gospel that Jesus Christ taught us, because it not only misrepresents what the gospel is meant to be, it misrepresents the God we serve. And that is something that we need to get into shape quickly. Another thing that I hear a lot is the phrase, well, we're just not ready. Well, get ready. Because every time I hear that phrase, we're just not there yet, we're not ready, I would counter by saying, how many times do you think the victims that are under our care were ready to be victimized? So get ready. This is coming, whether you like it or not. We need to get this right. So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the effects of violence in children, and I'm going to be touching on 4 different things. But before we get to that, we have one more poll. We have 2 actually in this presentation. I'm going to ask you guys all to type the word "leave" in the polls that you guys were using. That's going to exit you out of the NAD one, and we're going to go to one that I use for my personal presentations. So you're going to type the word "leave," and then you're going to be able to type R. Muriente, and I think that they haven't connected the clicker to my computer. Could you help me with that, please? So you're going to type "leave," and then you're going to write R. Muriente, there we go, 770. Okay, and here's the question. As long as a child is not a direct victim of abuse, they will be fine. How many of you believe that this statement is true? How many of you believe that this statement is false? And how many of you just aren't sure? So, as long as the victim is not as a child is not a direct victim, they'll be okay. Yes, A, B, no, C, I am not sure. And it's okay to be not sure, because we're here to educate ourselves about these issues, okay? One of the things that hinders our growth is lack of education. So we're here to educate ourselves. The reality is that a child is affected by everything that happens, even during the time that it is in mom's belly. Believe it or not, when a mom is pregnant and she is being abused by her husband or intimate partner, that child is physically and neurologically affected. Their ability to grow and flourish as a child inside that womb is compromised. Not a lot of people knew that. And the reality is that we have a lot of issues when it comes to deformities or things that happen at birth, and we're wondering, is this some type of genetic sign or something that I wasn't aware of? Nobody had this in my family. But if that mom was a victim of domestic violence, that child could have been compromised in its development. And that's the reality that we have. So we're going to have 4 objectives. We're going to demonstrate how trauma affects victims on a neurological level and how devastating it can be to the development of a child's brain, show the short-term effects and the long-term effects, and finally, resilience. I wanted to end it with a sign of hope, because this is a very heavy topics that we're touching. I want to at least leave you with some hope out there that something positive can happen. So the reality is that there are multiple ways that children witness domestic violence and abuse. Number 1 is seeing it, being physically present while the abuse is happening, hearing it. And this is important. Even if a child is not present in the room, let's say they're in their own room with the door shut, music blasting so they don't have to hear mom and dad arguing, they're being affected. They're being affected. Observing it, okay? And the observing is different than seeing it in this sense. They don't have to be physically present in the room. They can be watching on video abuse of other people, and that will trigger them as well. Okay? Being aware, just aware that something is wrong. Let's say mom is constantly having bruises. He is not in the house when they happen, but he knows that mom is being abused. As a direct victim, because sometimes abusers of women abuse children as well, as Dr. Renee had mentioned. And here's one that not a lot of people believe that actually happened. Children at times are forced by the abuser to abuse the victim. There are cases in which young boys are being threatened to abuse their mothers in a psychological way to break her and break them as well. I don't know if you guys know this, but this past week, I believe early this week, there was a news that a 16-year-old boy had killed his entire family. 16 years old. And I don't want you to ask yourselves what is wrong with this kid. What we should be asking ourselves is what happened to this kid to get him to do that. And that is the way I want you to begin asking questions. I want you to, instead of looking at children and addressing the behaviors, we need to ask ourselves, what is causing this child to act and think this way? David mentioned the adverse childhood effect. So the adverse childhood effect was done early in the 90s. Dr. Felletti and Kaiser Permanente came up with 10 different topics that they were able to recognize as clear signs that if it happened during the childhood of anyone, that if they were not addressed properly, in the adulthood, you would have significant effects. Okay, so those are 3 different categories. Okay, abuse, you have either physical, emotional, sexual. You have neglect, whether it's physical or emotional, and a household dysfunction, which could be mental illness, incarceration, mother being treated violently, substance abuse, and divorce. Almost half of America is dealing with some type of issue with divorce. That means half of America has at least one ACE. Dr. Renee mentioned that if you have one issue, it is very likely that it will translate to having another issue. My ACE score is about 5, sometimes I think a 6. Had I not addressed these issues, which I didn't in my childhood, had I not addressed them in my adulthood, the likelihood of me having a severely shortened life is very high. Both my parents died at the age of 69. My dad was 15 years older than my mom. He died as soon as I graduated college. My mom died last year, but they were both 69 when they died. My grandfather and my grandmother were both well into their 80s. I think my grandmother might have reached 90 before she passed. My mom, her ACE score was about an 8. My dad's ACE score is unknown because there's so many issues with, he was born in 1935. He had so many things that he did not communicate with me because that generation just didn't speak about the issues that happened to them. But it's important for us to realize that the things that happen to us in childhood directly impact our adulthood. How we treat others, how we treat family, our society, ourselves. Let me go back to this remote for a second. All right, so I want you to answer this poll. I can always tell when there is something wrong with my or a child. It's either yes or a no. You can always tell when there's something wrong with my child or a child. The majority of my professional career has been dealing with abused children. And it wasn't until I began working with abused children that I realized that I knew very little about being able to recognize signs of abuse. I'm fortunate to have a son who has a very clear telltale sign when he's in distress. I'll be in the couch or doing whatever, and all of a sudden I hear this. And I'll look at him, and I'll ignore him from time to time, trying to see if he's trying to tell me something. He'll get closer, and I'm like, are you okay? I don't want to talk about it. My son lets me know when something is bothering him. And even though half the time I have to wait a few minutes before he feels comfortable enough to talk to me about it, the fact that he talks to me about it is encouraging and at the same time something that I created in that home. My wife and I have been adamant about creating an environment in which our children feel safe talking to us about anything. And that is extremely important if we're going to get to the root of things that happen to our children. Because if your response to something happening, I have 10-year-old twins. I have a boy and a girl. And my immediate reaction was to hear, like, if anything associated with abuse towards my little girl, my mind goes from 0 to 1,000 in homicidal rage, right? However, I don't let anybody know that because I cannot let my little girl think that if something happens to me, daddy's going to get in trouble or daddy's going to get upset. So I keep that in as much as I can. Now, I do that because my wife has told me I don't do well in being able to hide how I become emotionally affected. I turn red, bright red when I'm very, very angry. But I've been practicing on being able to do that. And I do that with my son as well. We've created an environment where we tell our children, you know what, there's one rule that we really care about. Don't lie to us. Anything and everything that happens, we can work it out. The second you begin lying, we have a problem. So what I'm trying to do is encouraging them to be honest and sincere with us. But you know what? It's my responsibility to make sure I am in a level when they talk to me, because when that level goes up, their confidence in talking to me goes down. I need my little girl when she's 15 to be able to talk to me to say, Daddy, this little boy is being a little too touchy, so that I can talk to him later in private. But the reality is that how we react will determine how much information we get from our children, or children in general, about what's going on in their lives. And we need to create an environment where they feel confident and safe in doing so. So what can we see? Children who are witnessing abuse have different things that impacts them. On a prenatal level, right? Possible birth defects and malformation, increased chance of miscarriage. That's in their belly. Mom hasn't even given birth. And you can have possible birth defects and malformation in the fetus. In infants, excessive crying, irritability, a fearfulness of loud noises, sleep disturbances, digestive problems, development delays. There is a story of this young boy. I think he was 6 years old. He goes to, a doctor, and he was brought by his mom, and the doctor is trying to get some history about the boy, because the boy at 6 years old was at the size of a 4-year-old. And the doctor's trying to figure out, is there, a history in your family of people being excessively short? And not only was he short, but he seemed malnourished. And mom told him, well, there's only one thing that I can think of, is that he was molested when he was 4. His body stopped developing at the moment that he was molested. His body reacted to the molestation. There are times where you can see different things. I'm one of those people that you never want to have in a room full of abusers, because I can spot them a mile away. How they get so close to their spouse, and every time they introduce somebody, they have to look around and say, is it okay for me to answer? That happens. Having permission to be able to speak to somebody. Women, when they get introduced to a man, the guy kind of gets in between the man and his wife, so that there is nothing there, right? How they grab them and squeeze their hands from time to time. I'm one of those people, I'm paying attention to everything and anything that happens in a room. Have you ever touched somebody on the shoulder and their reaction is, hey, what's going on? People who are abused physically, if they don't see you coming and you touch them on the shoulder, that's their reaction. If that's the reaction that somebody has every time you touch them, that person is afraid of somebody hurting them, because somebody has hurt them. That is not a normal response. What we don't see. The neurological effects are often the ones that are not addressed because they don't manifest themselves in a tangible way. This is a brain scan. The one on the left to you is a normal scan. The other one is one of a child who has at least 6 ACEs. Now, the sacral portion are the ones that we want to pay attention to. Now, the brain has different functions. Okay, it's divided into 3 parts. You have the neocortex, that is all about the thought, planning, language, logic. The limbic system, which is all emotions and feelings, and then you have what's called the reptilian brain, the instinctual things that we do, right? Now, every time a child witnesses some type of trauma or experiences some type of trauma, the reptilian brain is active. Everybody knows fight or flight, right? Did you know that's a third? Who knows what the third one is? Freeze. Those are the 3 different things that the human brain will respond to trauma. Okay? They freeze if the brain perceives that's the best way for you to survive the trauma. There have been many rape victims who have been asked, did you say no? No, I didn't. Did you move away? No, I didn't. Did you do anything? No, I didn't. You know why? Because the brain shut their body down, because the brain said, if you don't move, we can survive this. And police officers who I have the privilege to work with, I work alongside the Special Victims Unit in Chattanooga, are all trained to understand that the interview process immediately after the trauma might not look anything like the interview 3 or 4 days later. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're lying. It means that their brain is functionally trying to process what happened. Now, a child who is always constantly using their reptilian brain, they don't get the blood flow or the development or nutrients needed for the rest of the brain to develop. This is why a 6-year-old has the size of a 4-year-old. This is why you have constantly kids going to school that cannot perform academically, because how in the world are they going to perform academically when the only thing they can think about is mama going to die tonight? Schools need social workers. Schools need mental health providers. Our schools need to get on the ball. All of us Seventh-day Adventist schools should have a social worker working on site. Every single one. Every single one. And if you have any influence over anybody that has that type of ability to make that happen, it's time to get ready. It needs to happen. Our schools are deficient in addressing the issues that affect children the most. Adverse childhood experiences. The memory works in a very specific way. Okay, whatever's in your environment, your brain senses it, it puts it on short term, then it transitions it to working memory where it uses past experience to try to develop, is this similar to something we've done in the past, so we can do a quick way to be able to process it, and then it stores it away. If you are constantly being affected by trauma, you are stuck in sensory and short term, because you're just trying to survive. That means that a child cannot use their working memory or even store it away. So low-performing schools in those tests, those standardized tests, maybe those scores are due to the fact that nobody has addressed their ACEs. There's a woman who's a licensed clinical social worker. She developed what's called trauma-informed schooling, and she did that in a school in, I believe, Oregon State. The year after she implemented the trauma-informed care, which is basically you being able to address trauma, the incidence of out-of-school suspension dropped by over 90%. Okay? I'm going to give you a short story. It's a little boy named Johnny. He's late for school. As soon as he walks into the school, everybody starts, making noises. He's late or whatever. And the teacher, as he's walking by the desk, says, do you have the assignment that's due today? He didn't say anything, continues walking. She's like, sir, do you have the assignment that's due today? He yells, F something, kicks the desk. He gets sent to the office where he's probably going to get suspended. What you don't know is that night, his dad was brutally beating mom to the point where he was hiding in the closet with his younger brother, trying to tell him, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, to the point where early in the morning, the police show, arrest dad, he's gone. Mom is so hurt from her injury, she can't walk the kid to school, so he walks his younger brother to school, making him late. Obviously, he did not have time to work on the assignment. Imagine if that teacher, when he had just kicked the desk and cussed at her, said, are you okay? How simple a question, but impactful in dealing with what could have happened. And instead of suspending him, we not only say, well, there has to be a consequence. Well, maybe we give him in-school suspension, but what we do is we make sure that mom is okay and that she receives any type of service available to her through the community. But if you don't do that, if you don't ask the question, are you okay, or what happened to you, he just gets suspended. The longer a child does not receive appropriate help in addressing trauma, the more likely they will be exposed to more trauma or engage in behaviors that will further delay the development physically, emotionally, and spiritually. This is the ACE pyramid. I want you to focus on the top part, early death. The study found that people who do not address their ACEs are likely to have 20 years cut from the life expectancy. 20 years. My parents died 69 years old. My grandparents, almost 90. It's real. Resilience, the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to end with this short story. I worked in a facility, and there was this young boy who came to the facility, a very angry young boy. He would get into fights almost daily. At least 3 or 4 times he was getting into a fight with anybody who looked at him. He was just a very angry kid. One day I asked him, you know, you can't punch your way out of every problem that you have. He's like, mister, if you lived my life, you'd be angry too. I'm like, tell me, why are you angry? My mom doesn't want me. I'm stuck in this facility. My dad, I don't even know who he is. I hate being here, and I can't leave. And I realized I would be angry too. So one day I talked to his clinician, and I asked this clinician, we need to help him. He's not a bad kid, he's just really angry. And I knew that the clinician had helped other kids in signing them up to Pee Wee football. I said, can we get him in football too? He said, yeah, we can do that. I'm like, awesome. I went to him and I asked him, hey, how would you like to hit people and not get in trouble? He's like, yes, I'm in. Great, we just signed you up for football. In his first week of practice, he comes to the van. I used to drive him to the practice. He says, mister, I quit. I'm like, why would you quit? Coach was ripping me about this or that or this. He doesn't know. I'm like, I can't let you quit, man. I can't let you quit. He's like, why? Why do you care? Because I care. We're coming back tomorrow. And we can stay in the car the whole practice, or you can go and handle your business. This boy became an all-star linebacker and running back. Kid was unstoppable. Not only that, he was asked to go to Florida on an all-star team in terms of the best players in Pee Wee football. He was so good that his mom started showing up to the games, to the point where his mom began to work with the clinician to develop a unification plan to have him finally back home where he belonged. This young boy, before he left, he told me this. You know, I was never going to make it out of here until you simply asked, why are you so angry? The fact that you cared enough to ask me that turned my life around. In 2 years, he went from a kid who fought every other day to an all-star athlete living back at home and being the kid that he was meant to be. This is what resilience can look like. Turning kids who have lost everything and giving them hope that they can do anything. Thank you.